Let's talk that most important word in the most trade at the moment, furlough. There were some big changes last week on this. Most importantly, with part-time being allowed and bringing back staff on that. Talk to me a little bit about how that works, Kil.
Sure, James. Yeah, thank you. First of all, yes, indeed, there were some very important changes introduced last week. And just before that, the Treasury issued modified directions. That's the actual law covering the scheme. Now, the important thing to understand that the current scheme as is closes on the 30th of June, at the end of June. So that means that for any employee who hasn't been furloughed yet, the last day to put them on furlough will be 10th of June, that is next week, because they will have to be on furlough this 3-week minimum time. Now, why that is important, not just for them to be able to claim under the current scheme, but also going forward, it's been indeed announced that they will have modified furlough, which will run till the end of October, and there are 3 major changes. Well, first of all, only those employees who've been on furlough under the current scheme for at least 3 weeks will be eligible to be put on furlough on the new scheme, and that's the date 10th of June is important. That's the kind of cut-off date. We haven't had detailed guide yet. I mean, we're expecting more details coming out on the 12th of June. But on Twitter, HMRC clarified that the employee will have to be at any time, so from the 1st of March onwards, any time within time space for 3 weeks on furlough to be able to then switch to the new scheme. So that's the first one. The scheme is essentially closed for the new entrants. The second one is the flexibility. And I think it's very much welcome news that the HMRC will allow the employees to do some part-time work and still remain on furlough. Because previously it was very much the set requirements. The employee would not be allowed to do any work. Well, indeed is not allowed to do any work for the employee now. That will be a major breach of the furlough conditions. And not only that, up until the modified directions was issued, it was specifically stated that the employee would have to consent in writing not to do any work. Now, from July forward, any combination of hours, any shift pattern, any work pattern will be allowed. The employer obviously will have to pay for the hours the work is done, and the rest will be covered under furlough. Now, and the third bit, which is probably not so good news, that's the level of support will be tapered off. For July, the level will remain at present. That is 80% of pay plus national insurance contributions plus pension contributions, some of them. And that will stay exactly the same for July. In August, the employer will be required to pay national insurance contributions and due pension contributions. That's already tapered off. Now, come September, the employee will still be getting 80% of the normal pay, but the employer will be expected to contribute not only NI and pension contributions, but also 10% of that. So 70% will be paid through the grant, 10% by the employer. And come October, that level of support will reduce to 60%. So the employer will have to contribute 20%, and the government will pay 60% of the eligible furlough grant.
Kirill, I've got quite a few questions on this, so please forgive me. But firstly, it's on that part time. So the employer, if they want to bring, they can bring the employees back for any amount of time they want, be it from half a day a week to 3 days a week. Is that correct?
That is exactly that. That is current understanding how it works.
So,
sorry, carry on.
So if the employer did that, they would have to pay that employee their normal full-time rate for that amount of time. Is that right?
Well, whichever rate the employee was on, so that should be covered for the work done, the hours worked. The employer will pay. The rest of it will be paid by the government, essentially, through the scheme. So if someone is applied, obviously was working part-time and then put on furlough, it will be prorated. But for those, say, full-time employees or part-time, any combination of working and workless days, hours should be allowed.
And with that, the second portion, the portion that's covered by the government, so they will get 100% of their wages for the time that they're working for the employer, and then the second part will be at the 80% rate until the furlough scheme ends. Is that right?
That's right, James. That is absolutely correct. That's how it will work.
So leading on from that, there will be a lot of businesses out there that are thinking that they haven't got full-time work for these members of staff, that they do want to bring some people back part-time, and actually going forward after the furlough scheme, that part-time will be something that will continue in their minds. Are they allowed to bring that staff member back now part-time and pay for the second portion of their wages, topping them up to 80% until the furlough scheme ends? Or if they've made the decision that these employees are going to be part-time even after the scheme ends, do they have to make that change now?
James, I'm afraid I will have to give you a typical legal answer. It depends. It will depend. Say if you have someone who is employed full-time, and then as you say the hours reduced, it's likely that there will be no enough work for full-time going after the furlough. Technically speaking, it will be a variation of the contract and will have to be agreed and be accepted by the employee. It can be done in various ways. For example, the furlough agreement itself may stipulate a condition that it could be varied going onwards, or it could be done at any time during the furlough. Variation can be discussed and agreed. So technically speaking, to put someone from full-time to part-time, the employment contract will have to be varied at some point, and that can be done in this way.
So if you're bringing someone back part-time now, you would have to have that discussion with them to say that even though they're on furlough, we're changing your terms and conditions of your employment to bring you back part-time part of the week, even though that might be something that's going to continue in the future?
That is correct. I mean, the furlough is an exception to quite a few rules, I would say. The employee will have essentially to surrender its pay, will have to agree not to do any work and a few other things in return for the furlough grant. The default position is that after furlough ends, the employment contract resumes in full with all the terms and conditions regarding the hours, regarding pay, and so on and so forth. So if some employees would need to think about changes, cutting the hours, perhaps cutting the pay, that variation will have to be discussed. I would suggest, yes, probably sooner rather than later, and furlough will be an opportune time to do so.